Light in the darkness. However well-tempered a man's character may be, and Herlock Sholmes is one of those men over whom ill fortune has little or no hold, there are circumstances wherein the most courageous combatant feels the necessity of marshalling his forces before risking the chances of a battle. "I shall take a vacation today," said Sholmes.
"And what shall I do?"
asked Wilson. "You, Wilson, let me see. You can buy some underwear and linen to replenish our wardrobe while I take a rest."
"Very well, Sholmes. I will watch while you sleep."
Wilson uttered these words with all the importance of a sentinel on guard at the outpost, and therefore exposed to the greatest danger. His chest was expanded, his muscles were tense. Assuming a shrewd look, he scrutinized, officially, the little room in which they had fixed their abode. "Very well, Wilson, you can watch. I shall occupy myself in the preparation of a line of attack more appropriate to the methods of the enemy we are called upon to meet. Do you see, Wilson, we have been deceived in this fellow Lupin? My opinion is that we must commence at the very beginning of this affair."
"And even before that, if possible. But have we sufficient time?"
9 days, dear boy. That is 5 too many." The Englishman spent the entire afternoon in smoking and sleeping. He did not enter upon his new plan of attack until the following day. Then he said, "Wilson, I am ready. Let us attack the enemy."
"Lead on, Macduff!"
exclaimed Wilson, full of martial ardor.
"I wish to fight in the front rank. Oh, have no fear. I shall do credit to my king and country, for I am an Englishman."
In the first place, Sholmes had 3 long and important interviews, with Monsieur d'Etnan, whose rooms he examined with the greatest care and precision, with Suzanne Gerbois, whom he questioned in regard to the blonde lady, and with Sister Auguste, who had retired to the convent of the Visitandines since the murder of Baron d'Hautrec. At each of these interviews Wilson had remained outside, and each time he asked,
"Satisfactory?"
"Quite so."
"I was sure we were on the right track."
They paid a visit to the 2 houses adjoining that of the late Baron d'Hautrec in the avenue Henri Martin. Then they visited the rue Clapeyron, and while he was examining the front of number 25, Sholmes said, "All these houses must be connected by secret passages, but I can't find them." For the first time in his life, Wilson doubted the omnipotence of his famous associate. Why did he now talk so much and accomplish so little? "Why?" exclaimed Sholmes in answer to Wilson's secret thought. "Because, with this fellow Lupin, a person has to work in the dark, and instead of deducting the truth from established facts, a man must extract it from his own brain, and afterward learn if it is supported by the facts in the case."
"But what about the secret passages?"
"They must exist. But even though I should discover them, and thus learn how Arsène Lupin made his entrance to the lawyer's house, and how the blonde lady escaped from the house of Baron d'Hautrec after the murder, what good would it do? How would it help me? How would it furnish me with a weapon of attack?"
"Let us attack him just the same,"
exclaimed Wilson, who had scarcely uttered these words when he jumped back with a cry of alarm. Something had fallen at their feet. It was a bag filled with sand, which might have caused them serious injury if it had struck them. Sholmes looked up. Some men were working on a scaffolding attached to the balcony at the 5th floor of the house. He said, "We were lucky. 1 step more and that heavy bag would have fallen on our heads. I wonder if—" Moved by a sudden impulse, he rushed into the house, up the 5 flights of stairs, rang the bell, pushed his way into the apartment to the great surprise and alarm of the servant who came to the door, and made his way to the balcony in front of the house. But there was no one there. "Where are the workmen who were here a moment ago?" he asked the servant.
"They have just gone."
"Which way did they go?"
"By the servants' stairs."
Sholmes leaned out of the window. He saw 2 men leaving the house, carrying bicycles. They mounted them and quickly disappeared around the corner. "How long have they been working on the scaffolding?"
"Those men? Only since this morning. It is their first day."
Sholmes returned to the street and joined Wilson. Together they returned to the hotel, and thus the second day ended in a mournful silence. On the following day their program was almost similar. They sat together on a bench in the Avenue Henri Martin, much to Wilson's disgust, who did not find it amusing to spend long hours watching the house in which the tragedy had occurred.
"What do you expect, Sholmes? That Arsène Lupin will walk out of the house?"
"No."
"That the blonde lady will make her appearance?"
"No."
"What then?"
"I am looking for something to occur. Some slight incident that will furnish me with a clue to work on."
"And if it does not occur?"
"Then I must myself create the spark that will set fire to the powder." A solitary incident, and that of a disagreeable nature, broke the monotony of the forenoon. A gentleman was riding along the avenue when his horse suddenly turned aside in such a manner that it ran against the bench on which they were sitting, and struck Sholmes a slight blow on the shoulder.
"Ha!" exclaimed Sholmes. "A little more and I would have had a broken shoulder."
The gentleman struggled with his horse. The Englishman drew his revolver and pointed it, but Wilson seized his arm and said,
"Don't be foolish! What are you going to do, kill the man?"
"Leave me alone, Wilson, let go!" During the brief struggle between Sholmes and Wilson, the stranger rode away.
"Now you can shoot,"
said Wilson triumphantly, when the horseman was at some distance.
"Wilson, you're an idiot.
Don't you understand that the man is an accomplice of Arsène Lupin?" Sholmes was trembling from rage. Wilson stammered pitifully.
"What? That man? An accomplice?"
"Yes. The same as the workman who tried to drop the bag of sand on us yesterday."
"It can't be possible."
"Possible or not, there was only one way to prove it."
"By killing the man?"
"No, by killing the horse. If you hadn't grabbed my arm, I should have captured one of Lupin's accomplices. Now do you understand the folly of your act?" Throughout the afternoon both men were morose. They did not speak a word to each other. At 5 o'clock they visited the Rue Clapeyron, but were careful to keep at a safe distance from the houses. However, 3 young men who were passing through the street, arm in arm, singing, ran against Sholmes and Wilson and refused to let them pass. Sholmes, who was in an ill humor, contested the right of way with them. After a brief struggle, Sholmes resorted to his fists. He struck one of the men a hard blow on the chest, another a blow in the face, and thus subdued 2 of his adversaries. Thereupon the 3 of them took to their heels and disappeared.
"Ah!" exclaimed Sholmes. "That does me good. I needed a little exercise."
But Wilson was leaning against the wall. Sholmes said, "What's the matter, old chap? You're quite pale." Wilson pointed to his left arm, which hung inert, and stammered,
"I don't know what it is. My arm pains me."
"Very much? Is it serious?"
"Yes, I'm afraid so."
He tried to raise his arm, but it was helpless. Sholmes felt it, gently at first, then in a rougher way, to see how badly it was hurt, he said. He concluded that Wilson was really hurt, so he led him to a neighboring pharmacy, where a closer examination revealed the fact that the arm was broken and that Wilson was a candidate for the hospital. In the meantime they bared his arm and applied some remedies to ease his suffering. "Come, come, old chap, cheer up," said Sholmes, who was holding Wilson's arm. "In 5 or 6 weeks you'll be all right again. But I will pay them back, the rascals. Especially Lupin, for this is his work, no doubt of that. I swear to you, if ever—" He stopped suddenly, dropped the arm, which caused Wilson such an access of pain that he almost fainted, and, striking his forehead, Sholmes said, "Wilson, I have an idea. You know, I have one occasionally." He stood for a moment, silent, with staring eyes, and then muttered in short, sharp phrases, "Yes, that's it. That would explain all. Right at my feet. And I didn't see it. Ah, parbleu, I should have thought of it before. Wilson, I shall have good news for you." Abruptly leaving his old friend, Sholmes ran into the street and went directly to the house known as number 25. On one of the stones to the right of the door, he read this inscription: Destange, architect, 1875. There was a similar inscription on the house numbered 23. Of course, there was nothing unusual in that, but what might be read on the houses in the Avenue Henri Martin? A carriage was passing. He engaged it and directed the driver to take him to number 134 Avenue Henri Martin. He was roused to a high pitch of excitement. He stood up in the carriage and urged the horse to greater speed. He offered extra pourboires to the driver. Quicker, quicker! How great was his anxiety as they turned from the Rue de la Pompe! Had he caught a glimpse of the truth at last? On one of the stones of the late Baron's house he read the words, Destange, Architect, 1874. And a similar inscription appeared on the 2 adjoining houses. The reaction was such that he settled down in the seat of the carriage, trembling from joy. At last a tiny ray of light had penetrated the dark shadows which encompassed these mysterious crimes. In the vast sombre forest wherein 1,000 pathways crossed and recrossed, he had discovered the first clue to the track followed by the enemy. He entered a branch post office and obtained telephonic connection with the Château de Crozon. The Countess answered the telephone call. "Hello, is that you, madame?"
"Monsieur Sholmes, isn't it? Everything going all right?"
"Quite well, but I wish to ask you one question." "Hello?"
"Yes, I hear you."
"Tell me, when was the Château de Crozon built?"
"It was destroyed by fire and rebuilt about 30 years ago."
"Who built it, and in what year?"
"There is an inscription on the front of the house which reads, Lucien Destange, Architect, 1877.
"Thank you, madame, that is all. Goodbye." He went away murmuring, "Destange, Lucien Destange. That name has a familiar sound." He noticed a public reading room, entered, consulted a dictionary of modern biography, and copied the following information. Lucien Destange, born 1840, Grand Prix de Rome, officer of the Legion of Honor, author of several valuable books on architecture, etc. Then he returned to the pharmacy and found that Wilson had been taken to the hospital. There Sholmes found him with his arm in splints and shivering with fever. "Victory! Victory!" cried Sholmes. "I hold one end of the thread."
"Of what thread?"
"The one that leads to victory. I shall now be walking on solid ground, where there will be footprints, clues—"
"Cigarette ashes?"
asked Wilson, whose curiosity had overcome his pain. "And many other things. Just think, Wilson. I have found the mysterious link which unites the different adventures in which the blonde lady played a part. Why did Lupin select those 3 houses for the scenes of his exploits?"
"Yes,
why?" "Because those 3 houses were built by the same architect. That was an easy problem, eh? Of course. But who would have thought of it?"
"No one but you."
"And who, except I, knows that the same architect, by the use of analogous plans, has rendered it possible for a person to execute 3 distinct acts which, though miraculous in appearance, are in reality quite simple and easy?"
"That was a stroke of good luck."
"And it was time, dear boy, as I was becoming very impatient. You know this is our 4th day."
"Out of 10.
"Oh, after this—" Sholmes was excited, delighted, and gayer than usual. "And when I think that these rascals might have attacked me in the street and broken my arm just as they did yours. Isn't that so, Wilson?" Wilson simply shivered at the horrible thought. Sholmes continued, "We must profit by the lesson. I can see, Wilson, that we were wrong to try and fight Lupin in the open, and leave ourselves exposed to his attacks."
"I can see it, and feel it, too, in my broken arm,"
said Wilson. "You have one consolation, Wilson. That is, that I escaped. Now I must be doubly cautious. In an open fight he will defeat me, but if I can work in the dark, unseen by him, I have the advantage, no matter how strong his forces may be."
"Ganimard might be of some assistance."
"Never. On the day that I can truly say Arsène Lupin is there, I show you the quarry and how to catch it, I shall go and see Ganimard at one of the two addresses that he gave me, his residence in the Rue Pergolese, or at the Suisse Tavern in the Place du Châtelet. But until that time, I shall work alone." He approached the bed, placed his hand on Wilson's shoulder, on the sore one, of course, and said to him, "Take care of yourself, old fellow. Henceforth your role will be to keep 2 or 3 of Arsène Lupin's men busy watching here in vain for my return to inquire about your health. It is a secret mission for you, eh?"
"Yes, and I shall do my best to fulfill it conscientiously. Then you do not expect to come here any more?"
"What for?" asked Sholmes.
"I don't know. Of course, I am getting on as well as possible, but, Herlock, do me a last service. Give me a drink."
"A drink?"
"Yes, I am dying of thirst, and with my fever—"
"To be sure. Directly." He made a pretence of getting some water, perceived the package of tobacco, lighted his pipe, and then, as if he had not heard his friend's request, he went away, whilst Wilson uttered a mute prayer for the inaccessible water. Monsieur Destange. The servant eyed from head to foot the person to whom he had opened the door of the house, the magnificent house that stood at the corner of the Place Malesherbes and the Rue Montchanin. And at the sight of the man with grey hairs, badly shaved, dressed in a shabby black coat, with a body as ill-formed and ungracious as his face, he replied with the disdain which he thought the occasion warranted, "Monsieur Destange may or may not be at home. That depends. Has monsieur a card?" Monsieur did not have a card, but he had a letter of introduction, and, after the servant had taken the letter to Monsieur Destange, he was conducted into the presence of that gentleman, who was sitting in a large circular room or rotunda, which occupied one of the wings of the house. It was a library, and contained a profusion of books and architectural drawings. When the stranger entered, the architect said to him, "You are Monsieur Stickmann?" "Yes, monsieur." "My secretary tells me that he is ill, and has sent you to continue the general catalogue of the books which he commenced under my direction, and more particularly the catalogue of German books. Are you familiar with that kind of work?" "Yes, monsieur, quite so," he replied, with a strong German accent. Under those circumstances the bargain was soon concluded, and Monsieur Destange commenced work with his new secretary. Herlock Sholmes had gained access to the house. In order to escape the vigilance of Arsène Lupin and gain admittance to the house occupied by Lucien Destange and his daughter Clotilde, the famous detective had been compelled to resort to a number of stratagems, and, under a variety of names, to ingratiate himself into the good graces and confidence of a number of persons, in short, to live, during 48 hours, a most complicated life. During that time he had acquired the following information. Monsieur Destange, having retired from active business on account of his failing health, now lived amongst the many books he had accumulated on the subject of architecture. He derived infinite pleasure in viewing and handling those dusty old volumes. His daughter Clotilde was considered eccentric. She passed her time in another part of the house and never went out. "Of course," Sholmes said to himself, as he wrote in a register the titles of the books which Monsieur Destange dictated to him, "all that is vague and incomplete, but it is quite a long step in advance. I shall surely solve one of these absorbing problems. Is Monsieur Destange associated with Arsène Lupin? Does he continue to see him? Are the papers relating to the construction of the 3 houses still in existence? Will those papers not furnish me with the location of other houses of similar construction, which Arsène Lupin and his associates will plunder in the future? Monsieur Destange, an accomplice of Arsène Lupin, that venerable man, an officer of the Legion of Honor, working in league with a burglar. Such an idea was absurd. Besides, if we concede that such a complicity exists, how could Monsieur Destange 30 years ago have possibly foreseen the thefts of Arsène Lupin, who was then an infant? No matter. The Englishman was implacable. With his marvelous scent and that instinct which never fails him, he felt that he was in the heart of some strange mystery. Ever since he first entered the house, he had been under the influence of that impression, and yet he could not define the grounds on which he based his suspicions. Up to the morning of the second day he had not made any significant discovery. At 2:00 of that day he saw Clotilde Destange for the first time. She came to the library in search of a book. She was about 30 years of age, a brunette, slow and silent in her movements, with features imbued with that expression of indifference which is characteristic of people who live a secluded life. She exchanged a few words with her father, and then retired, without even looking at Sholmes. The afternoon dragged along monotonously. At 5:00, Monsieur Destange announced his intention to go out. Sholmes was alone on the circular gallery that was constructed about 10 feet above the floor of the rotunda. It was almost dark. He was on the point of going out, when he heard a slight sound, and, at the same time, experienced the feeling that there was someone in the room. Several minutes passed before he saw or heard anything more. Then he shuddered. A shadowy form emerged from the gloom, quite close to him, upon the balcony. It seemed incredible. How long had this mysterious visitor been there? Whence did he come? The strange man descended the steps and went directly to a large oaken cupboard. Sholmes was a keen observer of the man's movements. He watched him searching amongst the papers with which the cupboard was filled. What was he looking for? Then the door opened, and Mademoiselle Destange entered, speaking to someone who was following her.
"So you have decided not to go out, father? Then I will make a light. 1 second. Do not move."
The strange man closed the cupboard and hid in the embrasure of a large window, drawing the curtains together. Did Mademoiselle Destange not see him? Did she not hear him? Calmly she turned on the electric lights. She and her father sat down close to each other. She opened a book she had brought with her, and commenced to read. After the lapse of a few minutes, she said, "Your secretary has gone?"
"Yes, I don't see him."
"Do you like him as well as you did at first?"
she asked, as if she were not aware of the illness of the real secretary and his replacement by Stickman.
"Oh, yes."
Monsieur Destange's head bobbed from one side to the other. He was asleep. The girl resumed her reading. A moment later, one of the window curtains was pushed back, and the strange man emerged and glided along the wall toward the door, which obliged him to pass behind Monsieur Destange, but in front of Clotilde, and brought him into the light so that Herlock Sholmes obtained a good view of the man's face. It was Arsène Lupin. The Englishman was delighted. His forecast was verified. He had penetrated to the very heart of the mystery, and found Arsène Lupin to be the moving spirit in it. Clotilde had not yet displayed any knowledge of his presence, although it was quite improbable that any movement of the intruder had escaped her notice. Lupin had almost reached the door, and, in fact, his hand was already seeking the doorknob, when his coat brushed against a small table and knocked something to the floor. Monsieur Destange awoke with a start. Arsène Lupin was already standing in front of him, hat in hand, smiling.
"Maxime Bermond!" exclaimed Monsieur Destange joyfully. "My dear Maxime, what lucky chance brings you here?"
"The wish to see you and Mademoiselle Destange."
"When did you return from your journey?"
"Yesterday."
"You must stay to dinner."
"No, thank you. I am sorry, but I have an appointment to dine with some friends at a restaurant."
"Come tomorrow, then, Clotilde. You must urge him to come tomorrow. Ah, my dear Maxime, I thought of you many times during your absence."
"Really?"
"Yes. I went through all my old papers in that cupboard, and found our last statement of account."
"What account?"
"Relating to the Avenue Henri Martin."
"Ah, do you keep such papers? What for?" Then the three of them left the room, and continued their conversation in a small parlour which adjoined the library. "Is it Lupin?" Sholmes asked himself, in a sudden access of doubt. Certainly, from all appearances, it was he, and yet it was also someone else who resembled Arsène Lupin in certain respects, and who still maintained his own individuality, features, and color of hair. Sholmes could hear Lupin's voice in the adjoining room. He was relating some stories at which Monsieur Destange laughed heartily, and which even brought a smile to the lips of the melancholy Clotilde. And each of those smiles appeared to be the reward which Arsène Lupin was seeking, at which he was delighted to have secured. His success caused him to redouble his efforts, and insensibly, at the sound of that clear and happy voice, Clotilde's face brightened and lost that cold and listless expression which usually pervaded it. "They love each other," thought Sholmes. "But what the deuce can there be in common between Clotilde Destange and Maxime Bermond? Does she know that Maxime is none other than Arsène Lupin?" Until 7 o'clock Sholmes was an anxious listener, seeking to profit by the conversation. Then, with infinite precaution, he descended from the gallery, crept along the side of the room to the door in such a manner that the people in the adjoining room did not see him. When he reached the street, Sholmes satisfied himself that there was neither an automobile nor a cab waiting there. Then he slowly limped along the boulevard Malesherbes. He turned into an adjacent street, donned the overcoat which he had carried on his arm, altered the shape of his hat, assumed an upright carriage, and, thus transformed, returned to a place whence he could watch the door of Monsieur Destange's house. In a few minutes Arsène Lupin came out, and proceeded to walk toward the centre of Paris by way of the rues de Constantinople and London. Herlock Sholmes followed at a distance of 100 paces. Exciting moments for the Englishman. He sniffed the air eagerly, like a hound following a fresh scent. It seemed to him a delightful thing thus to follow his adversary. It was no longer Herlock Sholmes who was being watched, but Arsène Lupin, the invisible Arsène Lupin. He held him, so to speak, within the grasp of his eye, by an imperceptible bond that nothing could break, and he was pleased to think that the quarry belonged to him. But he soon observed a suspicious circumstance. In the intervening space between him and Arsène Lupin, he noticed several people travelling in the same direction, particularly 2 husky fellows in slouch hats on the left side of the street, and 2 others on the right wearing caps and smoking cigarettes. Of course, their presence in that vicinity may have been the result of chance, but Sholmes was more astonished when he observed that the 4 men stopped when Lupin entered a tobacco shop, and still more surprised when the 4 men started again after Lupin emerged from the shop, each keeping to his own side of the street.
"Curse it!" muttered Sholmes. "He is being followed."
He was annoyed at the idea that others were on the trail of Arsène Lupin, that someone might deprive him, not of the glory, he cared little for that, but of the immense pleasure of capturing single-handed the most formidable enemy he had ever met. And he felt that he was not mistaken. The men presented to Sholmes's experienced eye the appearance and manner of those who, while regulating their gait to that of another, wish to present a careless and natural air. "Is this son of Ganimard's work?" muttered Sholmes. "Is he playing me false?" He felt inclined to speak to one of the men with a view of acting in concert with him, but as they were now approaching the boulevard the crowd was becoming denser, and he was afraid he might lose sight of Lupin. So he quickened his pace and turned into the boulevard just in time to see Lupin ascending the steps of the Hungarian restaurant at the corner of the Rue de Helder. The door of the restaurant was open, so that Sholmes, while sitting on a bench on the other side of the boulevard, could see Lupin take a seat at a table, luxuriously appointed and decorated with flowers, at which 3 gentlemen and 2 ladies of elegant appearance were already seated, and who extended to Lupin a hearty greeting. Sholmes now looked about for the 4 men, and perceived them amongst a crowd of people who were listening to a gypsy orchestra that was playing in a neighboring café. It was a curious thing that they were paying no attention to Arsène Lupin, but seemed to be friendly with the people around them. One of them took a cigarette from his pocket and approached a gentleman who wore a frock coat and silk hat. The gentleman offered the other his cigar for a light, and Sholmes had the impression that they talked to each other much longer than the occasion demanded. Finally, the gentleman approached the Hungarian restaurant, entered, and looked around. When he caught sight of Lupin, he advanced and spoke to him for a moment, then took a seat at an adjoining table. Sholmes now recognized this gentleman as the horseman who had tried to run him down in the Avenue Henri Martin. Then Sholmes understood that these men were not tracking Arsène Lupin. They were a part of his band. They were watching over his safety. They were his bodyguard, his satellites, his vigilant escort. Wherever danger threatened Lupin, these confederates were at hand to avert it, ready to defend him. The four men were accomplices. The gentleman in the frock coat was an accomplice. These facts furnished the Englishman with food for reflection. Would he ever succeed in capturing that inaccessible individual? What unlimited power was possessed by such an organization, directed by such a chief? He tore a leaf from his notebook, wrote a few lines in pencil, which he placed in an envelope, and said to a boy about 15 years of age who was sitting on the bench beside him, "Here, my boy, take a carriage and deliver this letter to the cashier of the Swiss Tavern, Place du Châtelet. Be quick." He gave him a 5-franc piece. The boy disappeared. A half-hour passed away. The crowd had grown larger, and Sholmes perceived only at intervals the accomplices of Arsène Lupin. Then someone brushed against him and whispered in his ear,
"Well, what is it, Monsieur Sholmes?"
"Ah, it is you, Ganimard."
"Yes, I received your note at the tavern. What's the matter?"
"He is there."
"What do you mean?"
"There, in the restaurant. Lean to the right. Do you see him now?"
"No."
"He is pouring a glass of champagne for the lady."
"That is not Lupin."
"Yes, it is."
"But I tell you—" "Ah,
yet it may be."
"It looks a great deal like him,"
said Ganimard naively.
"And the others? Accomplices?"
"No. The lady sitting beside him is Lady Cliveden. The other is the Duchess de Cleves. The gentleman sitting opposite Lupin is the Spanish ambassador to London." Ganimard took a step forward. Sholmes retained him. "Be prudent. You are alone."
"So is he."
"No. He has a number of men on the boulevard mounting guard. And inside the restaurant, that gentleman—"
"And I, when I take Arsène Lupin by the collar and announce his name, I shall have the entire room on my side, and all the waiters."
"I should prefer to have a few policemen."
"But, Monsieur Sholmes, we have no choice. We must catch him when we can."
He was right. Sholmes knew it. It was better to take advantage of the opportunity and make the attempt. Sholmes simply gave this advice to Ganimard: "Conceal your identity as long as possible." Sholmes glided behind a newspaper kiosk, whence he could still watch Lupin, who was leaning toward Lady Cliveden, talking and smiling. Ganimard crossed the street, hands in his pockets, as if he were going down the boulevard. But when he reached the opposite sidewalk, he turned quickly and bounded up the steps of the restaurant. There was a shrill whistle. Ganimard ran against the head waiter, who had suddenly planted himself in the doorway and now pushed Ganimard back with a show of indignation, as if he were an intruder whose presence would bring disgrace upon the restaurant. Ganimard was surprised. At the same moment the gentleman in the frock-coat came out. He took the part of the detective and entered into an exciting argument with the waiter. Both of them hung on to Ganimard, one pushing him in, the other pushing him out, in such a manner that, despite all his efforts and despite his furious protestations, the unfortunate detective soon found himself on the sidewalk. The struggling men were surrounded by a crowd. Two policemen, attracted by the noise, tried to force their way through the crowd, but encountered a mysterious resistance and could make no headway through the opposing backs and pressing shoulders of the mob. But suddenly, as if by magic, the crowd parted and the passage to the restaurant was clear. The head waiter, recognizing his mistake, was profuse in his apologies. The gentleman in the frock-coat ceased his efforts on behalf of the detective. The crowd dispersed, the policemen passed on, and Ganimard hastened to the table at which the 6 guests were sitting. But now there were only 5. He looked around. The only exit was the door.
"The person who was sitting here,"
he cried to the 5 astonished guests.
"Where is he?"
"Monsieur Destro?"
"No, Arsène Lupin."
A waiter approached and said, "The gentleman went upstairs." Ganimard rushed up in the hope of finding him. The upper floor of the restaurant contained private dining rooms and had a private stairway leading to the boulevard.
"No use looking for him now,"
muttered Ganimard.
"He is far away by this time."
He was not far away. 200 yards at most, in the Madeleine Bastille omnibus, which was rolling along very peacefully with its 3 horses across the Place de l'Opéra toward the Boulevard des Capucins. 2 sturdy fellows were talking together on the platform. On the roof of the omnibus, near the stairs, an old fellow was sleeping. It was Herlock Sholmes. With bobbing head, rocked by the movement of the vehicle, the Englishman said to himself, "If Wilson could see me now, how proud he would be of his collaborator. Bah! It was easy to foresee that the game was lost as soon as the man whistled. Nothing could be done but watch the exits and see that our man did not escape. Really, Lupin makes life exciting and interesting." At the terminal point, Herlock Sholmes, by leaning over, saw Arsène Lupin leaving the omnibus, and as he passed in front of the men who formed his bodyguard, Sholmes heard him say, "À l'Étoile." "À l'Étoile, exactly, a rendezvous. I shall be there," thought Sholmes. "I will follow the 2 men." Lupin took an automobile, but the men walked the entire distance, followed by Sholmes. They stopped at a narrow house, No. 40 Rue Chalgrin, and rang the bell. Sholmes took his position in the shadow of a doorway, whence he could watch the house in question. A man opened one of the windows of the ground floor and closed the shutters, but the shutters did not reach to the top of the window. The impost was clear. At the end of 10 minutes, a gentleman rang at the same door, and a few minutes later another man came. A short time afterward, an automobile stopped in front of the house, bringing 2 passengers, Arsène Lupin and a lady concealed beneath a large cloak and a thick veil. "The blonde lady, no doubt," said Sholmes to himself, as the automobile drove away. Herlock Sholmes now approached the house, climbed to the window ledge, and, by standing on tiptoe, he was able to see through the window above the shutters. What did he see? Arsène Lupin, leaning against the mantel, was speaking with considerable animation. The others were grouped around him, listening to him attentively. Amongst them, Sholmes easily recognized the gentleman in the frock-coat, and he thought one of the other men resembled the head waiter of the restaurant. As to the blonde lady, she was seated in an armchair with her back to the window. "They are holding a consultation," thought Sholmes. "They are worried over the incident at the restaurant and are holding a council of war. Ah, what a master stroke it would be to capture all of them at one fell stroke." One of them having moved toward the door, Sholmes leaped to the ground and concealed himself in the shadow. The gentleman in the frock-coat and the head waiter left the house. A moment later, a light appeared at the windows of the first floor, but the shutters were closed immediately, and the upper part of the house was dark as well as the lower. "Lupin and the woman are on the ground floor. The 2 confederates live on the upper floor," said Sholmes. Sholmes remained there the greater part of the night, fearing that if he went away Arsène Lupin might leave during his absence. At 4 o'clock, seeing 2 policemen at the end of the street, he approached them, explained the situation, and left them to watch the house. He went to Ganimard's residence in the Rue Pergolese and wakened him. "I have him yet," said Sholmes.
"Arsène Lupin?"
"Yes."
"If you haven't got any better hold on him than you had a while ago, I might as well go back to bed. But we may as well go to the station house."
They went to the police station in the Rue Mesnil, and from there to the residence of the commissary, Monsieur Descointres. Then, accompanied by 6 policemen, they went to the Rue Chalgrin. "Anything new?" asked Sholmes, addressing the 2 policemen.
"Nothing."
It was just breaking day when, after taking necessary measures to prevent escape, the commissary rang the bell and commenced to question the concierge. The woman was greatly frightened at this early morning invasion, and she trembled as she replied that there were no tenants on the ground floor.
"What? Not a tenant?"
exclaimed Ganimard.
No, but on the first floor there are 2 men named Leroux. They have furnished the apartment on the ground floor for some country relations.
A gentleman and lady?
Yes.
Who came here last night?
Perhaps, but I don't know. I was asleep. But I don't think so, for the key is here. They did not ask for it.
With that key, the commissary opened the door of the ground-floor apartment. It comprised only 2 rooms, and they were empty.
"Impossible!"
exclaimed Sholmes. "I saw both of them in this room."
"I don't doubt your word," said the commissary, "but they are not here now."
"Let us go to the first floor. They must be there."
"The first floor is occupied by 2 men named Leroux."
"We will examine the Messieurs Leroux." They all ascended the stairs, and the commissary rang. At the second ring a man opened the door. He was in his shirt-sleeves. Sholmes recognized him as one of Lupin's bodyguard. The man assumed a furious air.
"What do you mean by making such a row at this hour of the morning, waking people up?"
But he stopped suddenly, astounded.
"God forgive me. Really, gentlemen, I didn't notice who it was. Why, it is Monsieur Decointre. And you, Monsieur Ganimard, what can I do for you?"
Ganimard burst into an uncontrollable fit of laughter, which caused him to bend double and turn black in the face.
"Oh, it is you, Leroux," he stammered. "Oh, this is too funny. Leroux, an accomplice of Arsène Lupin. Oh, I shall die. And your brother, Leroux, where is he?"
"Edmond," called the man, "it is Ganimard who has come to visit us." Another man appeared, and at sight of him, Ganimard's mirth redoubled.
"Oh, we had no idea of this. Ah, my friends, you're in a bad fix now. Who would have ever suspected it?"
Turning to Sholmes, Ganimard introduced the man.
"Victor Leroux, a detective from our office, one of the best men in the Iron Brigade. Edmond Leroux, chief clerk in the anthropometric service."
End of chapter 4.